Hello everyone and welcome to Simulation. We are featuring John Cotton today.
Hey Alan.
Thanks for coming on to the show.
Great to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a little while. I really appreciate you coming on the show. This is going to be some really great conversation. John is a partner at Circling Institute. You guys have probably seen some of the videos on our channel. And I can do it a little bit of justice, but you'll do it the most justice. But go ahead and tell us about what Circling Institute is.
Well, circling, I would say, is a practice it's a communication practice where the context is purposely set to create deep connection, intimacy, like get to know the heart and soul of somebody, like way beneath just a normal surface conversation. Right? So it's like the cocktail conversations that drive everybody crazy. It's like, well, how do you get below that quickly and on purpose with somebody? But then, like, how far can you actually go? And it's a few things. One, it's about like how do we actually get somebody at the core of them, like really get what it's like to be them, get their whole world. Because I think something happens when we feel gotten by each other. Like everything changes, the whole connection. There's a whole new level of trust and bondness that happens. There's something, I think, healing, like when we feel like, it's just the feeling of being seen and really being gotten and accepted and sort of unconditionally loved. I think it's rare in a lot of our sort of Western world upbringings today. So when that can get created, there's something profound that happens, both like a reconnection with ourself and a potential of the type of connections we can have with each other. Yeah, which we seem to be drifting more and more away from these days with the sort of the world of technology, where we're texting each other. I imagine that one day we're going to be, people are going to be on a date and we're going to be texting each other across the table.
I like how you initially used the word communication as this essence of the practice. Communication is almost everything that humans do has something to do with communication, unless we're completely silent at a meditation retreat, maybe by ourselves. But even then, there's still some sort of communication when the gong happens and you all go to the hall, the meditation hall. So there's still some sort of communication even happening then. So to feel gotten, whatever the heck that even means, we don't have as much time today that we say we don't have as much time to get to know people, to ask them really tough questions about themselves, to inquire about them. And then usually when they say, I'm feeling a little bit sad, the first thing that comes to mind is, how do I fix that?
Yeah.
Because I want to help you not be sad. But there is a little bit of beauty in the sadness and maybe asking more about why the sadness exists with you and just being there to listen. Paraphrase so the person feels like they actually understand what's going on.
Yeah, there's so many levels of truth and possibilities to explore what you just shared. I mean, there's a level of, like, we want to fix it because we care, right? And that's just seems to be like what our attention is on. Like, how can we solve this and move on? And how can I help you in the quickest amount of time? But we find that doesn't necessarily lead to deeper connection and intimacy. It's more of like a transactional type experience. And I think there's something about the willingness to really be with a person in the complete truth of what is. Like, that's where healing and connection happens. And I think people, we're such in a rush today that it's sometimes hard to do that, but also we haven't really been trained to do that. Most of even our deeper conversations, I notice, are sort of about things that are going on in our lives versus the depth of our experience in relationship to what's going on in our life.
Yeah.
And what does that say about who we are and all that? And I think sometimes it's hard for people to to not want to fix, sometimes because of what we already said, but also sometimes because it might trigger something in them that reminds them of what they just heard. And it might be hard for them to be with that situation in themselves. So like, let me fix it in you so I don't have to feel it in myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
But something different happens when we're willing to be with it.
I think you also referenced the connection being amplified between two people. The oxytocin, the trust, this love, this oneness between the two. These don't get they don't get the light that they deserve to get in today's world because of everything else that we're doing so much. I think we spent more time, I'm not sure of course, but I think we spent more time in the past doing a little bit more of the just getting each other because there was less things to do.
Yeah, there's less we had our attention on. I mean, just my own childhood, I remember my parents would, if they weren't helping us with our homework or taking us shopping for something we needed, they were usually sitting in the living room reading books or talking. And that was at least a few nights a week. I mean, it was a much slower pace of life. I can't even imagine doing that these days. It's just like way too much to do. And that was just this last generation. I mean, if you just think back to our roots before we sort of came indoors, right?
Yep.
Maybe a few thousand years ago. It's much more tribally oriented. The stereotype of sitting around the campfire and talking with each other and everything. Our history was passed down through stories and through getting to know each other. Whew. Whole different pace of life. Yeah. Like to me I think there's so much stress these days because people are at a pace of life that's, to me at least, seems sort of like out of sync with like the heartbeat of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like that way of putting it.
Yeah. And there's something I think happens when we take the time to really sink in with each other. It's almost like we have to slow down. We have to slow down to really hear and feel what's in each other's heart. We can't just get it on an intellectual level because there's a different speed that happens there. Like to really tune in and attune to each other. It takes like the breath to feel into what's happening, you know. And I think something happens when we're willing to be with the depths of each other and to welcome whatever it is, and to let that tendency to want to fix things pass. We get to the places where we've been uncomfortable. Maybe the wounds that we've been carrying around our whole life that we've been avoiding. And we haven't wanted to feel it, so we kind of orchestrate our whole life to avoid these things being triggered or having to deal with them. Right? And then when we find somebody who's actually be willing to sit with us and not just kind of get it, but welcome it and want to explore it and want to like look at it with us, a whole different reality. Now all of a sudden there's a safety. Oh, there's a safety to maybe explore places in me that before I felt alone. Maybe I felt a little bit crazy, that like, why is this such an issue or something like that. Now somebody's helping me make sense of it. They're sort of looking at it through my eyes. They're getting me around it. I feel sane. I feel accepted. I feel safe. Like now you can sink into it. And usually, sometimes there's a well of not just avoidance, but old pain. Maybe there's some emotion there or whatever. But I find usually when we get to that point where we're with people and now they're willing to face it because they have company. Below that, there's a level of wisdom that they forgot they had. Like, and now they're tuning into something deeper in themselves, like a connection to source or their own full essence, or whatever you want to call it, their soul. And they start to come up with their own answers, probably better answers than our advice might have been for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, to me, that's a beautiful thing. And yet in that, there's a tremendous intimacy and deep connection that happens. I think we've all mostly craved that. I think human beings are, we're here for growth, and we're here definitely to learn and create. We're also here for love. And if that's missing, so much of the meaning of life is missing. And it's funny how we, in some ways, I think we've been taught to protect or be careful or be in fear of the thing that we're actually wanting the most. Just to love each other. But it takes a risk, because it requires us to reveal ourselves, to reveal that well of stuff that's I might not just be hiding from you, I might be hiding from myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a good lyric, revealing the layers to my soul. And the practice of circling reveals the layers, but first one must want to reveal the layers. And the layers get stacked on the more technology kind of drives our world. And so then it's harder to shed the layers, because we're focused on top of all of these layers all the time in our culture, in our day-to-day. So
you seem to want to. Here you are. You I see you as this, you're incredibly brilliant intellectually. You seem
I know nothing.
You seem to be able to communicate with anybody on any topic, even though you're not trained in it. Right? There's somehow you're tapped into some level of infinite intelligence. Yet, you could just totally get consumed in that. But I see in you a really rich heart and a deep desire to connect and bond with people. And so, how did you get past those layers? Now I'm interviewing you.
I know nothing. I know nothing, because especially about the human-to-human connection, for sure nothing.
Huh.
Yeah. The layers are interesting because we don't even know that the layers are there.
Yeah.
And how are you? Oh, I'm good. That classic one. If we actually just slowed down and took the time to be like, how do I feel in this moment? And just said the actual feeling to the person.
Right.
That would even change a society quite a bit. And then, of course, the other person must be willing to be with that feeling. It's hard if you're at a checkout of a store and you're like, how are you?
Yeah.
Because what are you going to have, 10 seconds, 15 seconds? So versus when you actually slow down with somebody for an hour. And even then, a lot of our conversations today in the business world are, how can I be useful to you? How can you be useful to me? It's not like, your grandmother just died.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel?
Yeah.
What are you going through right now?
Mm-hmm.
And just being with the feelings of what that is. For me, it's always insatiable curiosity. Einstein, I have no special talent. I'm just insatiably curious. And I'm insatiably curious about figuring out human to human. But I'm also a little bit critical of the amount of time that I pass on that as well. Yeah. You pass a lot of time mastering this, and that's who you are. That's your essence of mastering this. And me, on the other hand, I dabble into it, and I want to slower master it, because I'm also focusing on mastery of being an interlocutor and stuff. But at the same time, I think circling enables people to have space to vent. It enables people to have space to be with someone else's feelings and really get each other. That is very important. But I think there's also a level of just having maybe an excessive amount of needing to just vent and needing to just, please be with my feelings, please be with my feelings, the next week be with my feelings. There is a little bit of an ego drive in the world to also want to provide some sort of utility to the world, and we can't provide utility if we're constantly in the need for somebody to be with how we feel. So I think there's an interesting, plug into circling, but also plug back into the world. And yeah, and I think circling empowers you to plug back into the world with a more effective vibe for yourself, for your essence, and for the essence of humanity. So 7 years as a partner at Circling Institute, this has been probably, how many people have you seen? Tens of thousands of people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't even know what the number is, yeah.
And so this is all different types of flavors of humans. You've gotten to know humans better than definitely in the top 1% of people, because you've gotten to know the true essence of another person and all these different flavors. Have you found patterns?
I mean, I think there's a basic disconnect happening today that we already talked about, just people feeling disconnected from each other, people feeling disconnected from themselves. I think, like you said, there has to be a mapping over to real life as well. I think when you start to develop communication skills where you get the nuances of what's happening in communication, and when you can actually get what's going on with somebody, it maps over to business. It maps over to your family. It maps over to your partner. It maps over, to your friends. There's no situation where it doesn't have an impact.
True.
Right, and like you become. I watch people who go through our trainings and stuff like that, like people who are really committed, stay there a long time, and there's something that changes them. Like you can actually tell from across the room. You look at them and like, whoa, there's a whole level of presence. There's a comfortability in their own body. There's a willingness to welcome anything somebody brings to them. So I find like those are the people who end up just magnetizing people to them.
Yeah.
Like they become valuable. People want to do business with them because it's easy. It's like if it's just a transaction, like they get the purpose, they get the understanding of it, they're willing to talk about anything any dissonance, anything that seems off or it doesn't seem like it might work. That's just a really crisp communication that can happen there. And yet, on a personal level, that's a person that's phenomenally valuable because they'll like you said, like sometimes we don't even get past the first layer with each other. Like even sometimes good friends, let alone peers in a work environment who've been with each other for years and still don't know the first thing about each other. Maybe friends know the details. And oftentimes the conversation is around the details. It's like, well, catch me up. Like, how was your week? Or what have you been doing, right? And they say something, or how are you? And like you said, like one level of emotion, go, oh, and the traditional answer is, oh, okay, got it. It's like, you don't got it. You've just got the first layer of what's going on. Like if you just keep asking and looking for what's really alive there?
Yeah.
Like what's the thread that goes like all the way down that's connected to something deep? Because we all have those in our life. We all have those places that either we're ignoring or we have our attention on because we can't not have our attention on.
I like to call it reactionary versus inquisitory sometimes.
Yeah.
Because when you finish your sentence about your recent project that you were working on, you can ask, oh, like, why? Why were you working on that project? Versus to be like, oh, I was working on a project too last week. Let me tell you about. So there's.
Yeah, that's where, like, most people don't listen. Like, we listen for what we're going to say next, or for what we're going to contribute, or whatever. But when we're really deeply listening to somebody, then we're not just listening to hear the details of what they said. We're listening for like the meaning of it to them.
Yep. Like
what really matters and why. Like you said, why did you work on that project? Like what is it feeding in you? You know, what's the desire there? What's the value? Yeah. And even deeper, like what does it say about who you are and maybe your mission here and your challenges and
Yeah.
yeah.
I like
that face.
Well, the face actually kind of feeds into what you said earlier that I wanted to make sure to comment on, but it was the word nuance. Nuance in communication and how that actually pans over to every other aspect of our lives. Family, work, friends, everywhere. Nuance. And this can be everything from, like you were just indicating, a nice movement of the eyebrows. You can just do something like, and if you just transition your face to these different expressions, you don't even need words. I don't even need to say words to you for you to feel like I'm absorbing what you're saying.
Yeah.
With a high efficiency. And so that level of nuance, when you bring that into business and family, people register that. I recently was learning about how the eyebrows literally evolved for a deeper expression of nuance and emotion.
That's great.
And I mean, we know nothing, but we're trying to figure things out. And to be able to leverage nuance, we don't even need the vocal cords. We can just have these different facial expressions, practicing silence, practicing not speaking, and then also practicing paraphrasing what one is feeling. And this works, like you said, as well in business and family. I think the relatability of this practice to the other aspects of our lives is always really important. How do you plug it back into culture and into the world? Yeah.
It's good to be with you.
You too, John.
Yeah. You took a couple of our weekends.
I love circling.
How's it sitting with you right now?
Yeah, circling has... I think circling was the thing that really taught me about the difference between just listening and being with someone's feelings versus giving them advice. And that was probably one of my biggest takeaways from circling, because I used to, some people that watch this really know me, and they know that whenever I talk to people, I'm always, actively listening, paraphrasing, but then I send over advice as well. And a lot of people want that. And a lot of people, take that advice and they run with it, and they're like, yeah, it worked, or maybe it didn't work, etc. But now there's a difference between when you don't give advice, when you're just listening, paraphrasing, being with the feelings, totally different vibe. Some people that want advice don't want that. Some people that don't want advice want you to just be with their feelings. So it's also important to know, to maybe ask in the flow of conversation or even before conversation starts.
Because it's a whole different conversation when you're wanting advice. It's like, hey, let's brainstorm. Let's see what we can create. Like that's just you have your attention on something different. So it's a different context.
Can I ask, do you ask prior to the conversation starting, would you like advice, or would you like us to just be with how you're feeling? Do you do that, or how is a good way to go about that?
Yeah, if I don't know, like a lot of times you can just tell.
You can tell?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, again, it depends on the context. If you're just hanging out with a friend and a friend is bringing you a problem or something like that, then yeah, in that moment I might ask, because it might be more important to just actually be with them and explore what it's like for them, so they feel understood and you actually understand them.
So you start with being with the feelings and not giving advice, and then maybe down the line of the conversation you'll say, are you interested in hearing some thoughts that might be advice or helpful to what's going on?
Yeah, I think if I was going to do that, I would probably, I'd probably do it when, in a way, that exploration or that part of the whole conversation or journey together was over.
And then
now we're in a different place. Now we're in a different, like a different context. Because I more and more, when I'm with somebody on that level of exploration, when you get down into stuff, you know, in the human experience, there's often a lot of stuff there that's really tender. And it strikes me as like that's a sacred place. It's like sacred space. And so I don't like bringing advice into the sacred. To me, the sacred is just like, it's like, all right, it's your experience, your journey, your growth, your wounds, your broken hearts, your desires. Like, that's just to be honored.
Mm-hmm.
Honored, appreciated, welcomed, loved. Yeah, like I said, and then like the person, like just trusting that a person does have their own wisdom, like we all have our own internal guidance. And if we trust somebody enough so that they remember to trust themselves, like we usually find it. Yeah. And then the exploration and advice giving and things like that, I have less and less need or desire to actually do that these days, I find.
Do you think that once you peel the layers from just paraphrasing and being with someone's feelings, and they peel the layers back themselves to the essence, to the source, once they get there and they have a profound experience, at that point then the advice is unneeded because the essence came alive enough to where there was a realization?
Yeah. You know, that doesn't mean that sometimes people, you know, don't sometimes need direction or support or help or training or like help understanding their choices, right? So they can make a good informed decision. Yeah. But to me, that's a different level of giving advice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like this analogy a lot of the layers being peeled back by a process of venting, holding space for somebody to just be with their feelings. Now, when people peel back the layers, sometimes there are quite deep aspects to their character, to their being, to their past, to their present, to the way that they're feeling. Sometimes it's trauma from the past. Sometimes it's a fear that's coming up. There's these different aspects that come up of people's character, and usually when the layers get peeled back, there can be some pretty interesting exploration that occurs for them.
Yeah, usually our wounds are emotional. They're messy. Yeah. And we've been trying to keep them under wraps for so long that when they finally do come out, like, you know, they sort of come out all over the place. Yeah. And knowing that somebody can actually be with that is what makes the difference as to whether someone's even willing to go there. Yeah. So that's why we tend to hide that stuff from ourselves for so long. Yeah. But there's something. Key. But there's a difference, because I'm hearing our conversation, and it's almost starting to sound a little bit like, how do you be with somebody and do therapy or something like that? And that's not really where, like, we come from with circling. It's so, like, somehow when we get all the way through, like a deep connection like that, or quote a circle, like with your attention on somebody, it's often very therapeutic.
I was about to say that too.
But that's not the agenda.
Exactly.
The agenda is actually no agenda.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just to be with each other. To me, the agenda is like, how do we create intimacy and connection and love? Right. And so these are just the practices that we found seem to do that. That seems to be the map for how human beings get there.
Yes.
Right? And
yes.
so a lot of it, so the difference in therapy is a couple things. One is we're sharing our own experience as well and willing to reveal it. So it's not just like me asking you questions and exploring your world to try to make you feel safe and all that. Because if I just kept doing that, then I can sound like a therapist or I can sound like an interrogator. Like I just keep asking you questions. And then I find in most conversations, at some point, it'll start to feel unsafe. It's like, wait a second. You're just asking me all the questions. Like I keep revealing myself, but you don't seem to have any skin in the game. Like you don't have anything at stake. And as soon as like we start to reveal ourselves and our own vulnerability, it's like, oh, like Alan, being with you, I notice I'm feeling really alive. I'm feeling excited. I'm feeling some love for you. I'm feeling still a little scared because I don't want to fuck up the podcast. Are we allowed to say fuck up on the podcast?
Yeah, of course.
Cool.
Yeah.
like now,
We say fuck all the time.
So now, anytime we reveal our own experience, generally we don't really know what's going to happen next. We don't know, is the person going to accept me? Are they going to judge me? Am I going to feel embarrassed? Are they going to think I'm weird and disconnect? Like we just don't know. And so there's a risk there. And the other person feels that risk. Like they feel that willingness. Like I'm offering something of myself to you, my own experience. And as you feel that, you go, oh, like he's being a little bit vulnerable. Like he doesn't know how I'm going to react. And somehow it creates a little bit more of a permission for you to do the same. And that's the invitation for depth. So that's for us, that's like the first thing is you have to start with yourself. We call that sovereign. We have a whole weekend training about that. It's actually coming up in a few weeks. But so it's like, how do you know your own truth, your own experience? How do I actually know how I feel? So many people today don't even know how they feel. They're so up in technology that they're disconnected from their own experience. So part of that is redeveloping that comfort in your own skin again. And the knowing of yourself, like what am I actually experiencing? How do I feel emotionally? Like, emotions give us a tremendous amount of information about the truth and the rightness of our direction and what we're doing, and if it makes sense to us, right? So being willing to reveal that to another human being, like now we can feel each other, and there's such a richness. Like that's, to me, that's like the beginning of love and care for each other. It's like the willingness to feel each other's experience and feel each other's humanity. You know, so if I can share that with you, now it makes it a little bit safer for you to share that with me. Now, as you share with me, I can start to feel into what it's, now that I know me, I can start to feel into what it's like to be you. And that's the other part of it. So we call that the explorer. All right, so let's co-explore your world together, even to the point that we find like uncharted territory, like parts of you that you can't even explain to me because you don't even know it yet. And now we're in it together, and that's really exciting. Mm-hmm. When we get to discover you together, like the newness of you, the parts that haven't been revealed to yourself yet, oof, yeah, that's exciting. Yeah.
So sovereignty first, know thyself.
Know thyself.
Yes, and maybe we can get a couple more items there as we got to next one was co-exploring together. Explorer. But let's take a brief at know thyself first.
Yeah.
As we take a pit stop there, you said to feel. Okay, so I feel how I'm feeling. Okay, maybe I was just on the street and there was a lot of noise on the street and it was kind of making me feel uneasy.
Go ahead. Why don't we make it more real?
Let's make it more real.
What's it like to be with me right now?
It feels like we're co-exploring. And
what's the feeling of co-exploring for you?
the feeling of co-exploring feels like I'm diving into the pool of wisdom. So I'm like, now I'm swimming. I'm swimming in what we're co-exploring. Yeah.
So does it feel exciting? Does it feel soft? Does it feel relaxing?
I like that one, soft. Yeah.
Soft.
It feels very soft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost like the way you described the movement, it almost felt like velvety or something.
Yes, velvety. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that example of what you just did was you further asked and you wanted to know about how it was feeling. And so that same example, once we kind of know ourselves and how we're feeling about our day-to-day actions involving almost everything, then it makes it easier for us to inquire about how somebody else is feeling, and then we explore further.
Right.
Okay, so then we
And
go ahead.
which has to do with the other sort of basic skill or capacity that we describe in this practice, which is called speaking the moment.
Speaking the moment.
Right. So so right now, like we can be talking about circling, we can be talking about technology or the world or our history of connection or whatever, or we can be talking about our connection right now and what's happening.
Which
Like,
was
what
the
does it
soft,
feel
velvety
like?
swimming. That was the
Right.
moment. Yeah.
Right. So actually speaking what's happening between two people is something that most of Western world today avoids like crazy. We're always talking, like we get together and we're talking about some third thing.
Yeah.
You know, the football game
The
or
third thing,
people
yeah.
or something we purchased or
How to grow the business.
grow the business. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Versus actually what's happening right now,
Yeah.
which tends to be what's most alive.
Yeah.
You do that and just people like they just light up, or they go into terror. But something happens, something rich happens.
It brings me back though to that balance between investing lots of time into just being with feelings and then also being focused on trying to leverage time to bring some sort of utility to the world as well, at a larger scale. So that being able to swing back and forth between the two is something that I care about a tremendous amount. Okay, maybe we go into the third, from the know thyself sovereignty to the explorer, co-exploring with somebody. This is kind of the Circling Institute's, what would you call this?
I guess you would call it sort of a model of this type of authentic relating, or the depth of where this practice can go. It's part of what we call the 7 stages of circling, which is actually, there's a 2-hour webinar on our website.
Link in bio.
So
Go check it out.
Yeah, if somebody wanted to just sort of understand the whole model and get some practical applications that they can start using in their life right away, that's a good place to start. Yeah. So the first 2 stages of that 7 stages of circling is sovereign and explorer.
Number 3.
Number 3?
Yeah.
You really want to know?
Yeah. Of course.
Number 3, we actually just had the weekend in our year-long training on it this past weekend. Number 3 is warrior. And so warrior is, most people think of warrior as like a challenge, like me challenging you, which is completely not what we would call warrior. There might be aspects of that, but it's sort of more like, instead of me being a warrior at you, it's being a warrior for you. Mm-hmm. And so I might notice something that's off, like some dissonance, like you might be talking about how happy you are with everything you're doing, and yet I'm noticing a frown and you're almost in tears. I go like, what's going on here? Like, is there something off for you, right? Or you might just say something that is really impactful for me, but you might just say it nonchalantly and go right by it. Like, you gave an example a minute ago. It's like somebody just died or something like that. Like, oh yeah, my grandfather just died. I just went to the funeral, and then I came back and I had all this work to do. And like, wait a second, your grandfather just died? Oh my God! Like, were you close to him? And like, just exploring it. Like, so just like stopping it, like helping a person stay with the truth of what is, that might be something that really matters to them, and somehow it's hard for them to be with it. So they're forgetting how much it matters. So warrior is like pointing to that and like bringing it right back there so that they can be with it, and you get the richness of being with it with them, because that's probably one of the things that has the most meaning in their life at this moment in time, right? So that's where the most juice is going to be.
It takes a certain amount of confidence in oneself to pause the other person as they're trying to breeze by. My grandfather just died, and I'm going back to work, and it's like, pause.
Right.
Were you close? How do you feel? What was time like with your grandfather?
Yeah.
You know, that I love that, because we fail so much as we try and figure out how to do that, and so the fear of failing holds people from ever breaking that flow. Oh, they tried to breeze by because they didn't want to talk about it themselves.
Right. Or it's like, oh, I don't want to do something wrong with you, or I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, right? If you were breezing by that, it's like you're moving away from that because you already feel discomfort around it, right? So, and you'll probably, our deepest wounds, it's like we're feeling uncomfortable around them every day of our lives. We're just numb to it. And so we never heal them. We're just always avoiding them. And it takes a lot of energy to resist something to the point that you're not willing to feel it anymore. And
you're
it's scary.
Keyboard, run to the next thing, phone call, keyboard, run to the next thing. And then when I get the chance to sit down, oh, John, like, I can't be vulnerable with John. I don't want to share this information with John. Will John even really care?
Exactly.
Does he have time for me?
And so when you sense that in somebody else, that's why it's warrior, because wow, it takes something. It takes overcoming my own fear, like I'm gonna mess you up, or you're gonna be mad at me for ask you to talk about that, or I'm gonna hurt you in some way, versus wait a second, like this seems to matter. So like I have to be willing to get past my own stuff and maybe your own stuff to say, oh, wait a second, that seems really important to you.
Yeah.
Like that's where my attention is right now. Like I don't want to talk about the work stuff yet. If you're really hurting about that, like let's talk about that for a few minutes.
Yeah. I want to. Can we go to 4? Because I want to make sure that we can get all of the model.
You want all 7 now, huh?
I want to get through the model, because I think the model is really important to talk about. Yeah.
So 4 is deep sea diver. So typically, what happens when you get to the warrior phase, right? You're pointing at something that, if you really follow it down, it usually, why are we avoiding something? Because it usually leads, like what I've been metaphorically pointing is here. Boy, I must have a lot of unprocessed wounds right here. Keep going like this. So, like those are our core wounds. And so when we start to get in there, the reason we've been avoiding them is because they usually are messy and they're full of emotion, and we're terrified that if we go there, we're going to get lost in them. Like we'll never find our way out. I'll never be able to get back to work. I'll never be able to get effective again. I'm just going to be in my suffering.
When
So
it's
why should I
normally
go there?
the contrary, that it makes us much better at everything else we do in life.
Because you've been fighting that. It's been taking so much energy to suppress it that a big chunk of our energy, we don't even know where it went, right? And so when we get in there and it finally opens up, we finally, you know, maybe for 5 minutes or 5 days or whatever, we become a hot mess. And someone's there to like hold us and be in it with us and make sense of it. Usually now it's so much of that energy that we spent fighting it and avoiding it is freed up. Yeah. But that process of getting in there and going down, yep. And once we get like that's the warrior of like, we call it kind of like sealing the exits, but not in a bad way, in a loving way. It's like, no, like let's not change the topic to these different things. Like, this seems to be so important and worthy, yep. of our exploration, right? If you want. It's not about forcing. It's
Correct.
about staying with somebody like in the truth of what is, right? But also having the sovereignty, right? Like, I care about this. Like this is where my attention is. This is where my desire is. Like, I want to know about that. That seems rich. So that's the warrior, because it takes something. And then when we get in there, we get into whatever the stuff is or the topic is, it might not be wounds. It might be like, this is where your joy and your passion and your ecstasy is, but you haven't been paying attention to it, right? Whatever. But that's the deep sea diver, when you sort of follow that thread really deep into like the essence of who that person is. Yeah.
This is very interesting because a little over a year ago, I was doing a presentation at the First Robotics World Championship, and I was literally presenting the submarine as, it's crazy because we didn't know each other then. And you guys were talking about deep sea diver, and I was in Houston doing a presentation on the submarine and the importance of going from the surface level conversation. As you go dive deeper with somebody with your submarine, the submarine's going to get some dents. There's going to be some issues that happen with the mechanics of the submarine over time, and that you got to just, with the failure, you're going to resurface, patch up the submarine, and go right back down.
And how did you know all that?
It's just so fascinating that this is going on across.
You just tapped into universal intelligence somehow.
It's great that you guys were doing deep sea diver. I was talking about submarine. It's so fascinating. I think that does have to do with that ocean of wisdom, that lake of wisdom, pool of wisdom, just tapping into it from different angles. And so, okay, that's 4's deep sea diver. How about 5?
So then something happens when you get through that, you get to the bottom of that, and you get like through whatever you've been trying to get through. Because usually there's so much resistance, it's a pretty narrow pathway through it. Like there's metaphors in literature about stuff like that, like the dark night of the soul, or like walking through the valley of death kind of thing, right? Or like a spiritual crisis, some people call it, or whatever. But when you finally find your way through, which is much easier to do when you have somebody like in it with you that you trust and you feel safe with, and it's helping you make sense of it, right? Like a fresh set of eyes as well, someone that's not judging you, because we're probably judging the crap out of ourselves, our whole life around stuff like this, right? There's shame there and all sorts of horrible stuff. But when we get through it, and usually, when we're in this kind of depth of conversation, like, people usually get through it. And so then, like, something opens up. Like, so all of a sudden, it's like a whoosh, like a whole new perspective, a whole new peace of mind, a whole new way of looking at something. Like, literally, something new has been born. Mm. And so that phase we call midwife. It's like the birth of something new, right? So like warrior.
Thank you, Ron.
So like warrior.
Okay.
What is that?
That's our 15-minute
Cool.
15-minute glass.
Cool. I love that.
I was like, hourglass? No, it's a 15-minute glass, but do we call it a quarter-hour glass? That's probably right, quarter-hour glass. So yeah, it's a nice. It also.
And it's pretty.
Yeah, and there's something about the way that we can tie the sand falling with time.
Right.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Love that.
So midwife can also maybe be like a genesis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So like if you like we called it the warrior, seeing what hasn't been seen. Right? Because the attention is off of something and help pointing out, oh, like we haven't been, it doesn't seem like you've been noticing this, right? And then the deep sea diver is feeling what hasn't been felt, right? That's where all the turmoil is. I'm avoiding feeling it. All right, what if we felt that together? What's in there? What are you afraid of? What's the truth of what's actually there, right? What does it mean to you? And then like, getting through that, it's awful. Something new. Birth is something new,
Yeah.
midwife. Yeah. And it's like seeing your whole life or the moment or your challenge or your wound, seeing it with completely new eyes or new possibility.
There was this feeling of me not ever being heard by anybody else talking about the death of my grandfather that was finally able to come to light through me, how I felt about it, thanks to somebody else and taking time in the space for me to have that feeling and have that midwife experience. Okay, how about...
Oh, there might have, I mean, there's probably, it wouldn't have been that simple. Probably would have been like, we would have just kept exploring deeper and deeper, and like your grandfather would have represented something else in your childhood that you just, never had from anybody else, and blah, 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 blah. There probably would have been a whole major story around
Correct.
it. Yeah.
What's 6?
So 6 is, so what once, and the midwife usually just takes, that's again the sacred space. It just takes like a tenderness, almost like a new baby's being born, to just be with it and just point to, oh, it's like something just changed, like what's new, right? And then it's like letting the person speak to that. And as words or attention are being given to that, usually there's an integration that just starts to happen.
Yep.
Like their whole history and their relationship to the history leading up to that starts to look different. Like they start to see it through different eyes, so they kind of reframe it all, and the present looks different.
Yep. And
then how tomorrow occurs to them, they see it through a different level of possibility of of how they can be with it, what they can do, how the world occurs to them. Like everything changes. So we call that stage integration.
Yep.
Yeah.
Integration is so crucial for so much awareness expansion. Okay, but how do we integrate that into our lives as we move on? Yeah, that's a big part of like psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy as well right now, is the integration portion of it. The circling process, integrating the midwife into.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, because if it's not going to enrich our meaning and our ability to function and bring this into our life, then like why are we doing it?
And
so
how would, if that 6 is integration, what's 7?
7 is completion.
Completion.
So how do you artfully complete either any process, any moment, any connection with somebody in a way that's elegant, that maybe speaks to, and again, speaking the moment, like what just happened? Like what did we just go through together?
Yeah.
And speaking it as a way of honoring it and bringing reality to it. Like, oh yeah, that just did happen, didn't it? Like we're on the same page about that. Like you noticed it happen, you got that I noticed it happen. Like we get that, and that creates an invitation for something next time.
Yeah.
So many people today, it's like the end of the conversation, it's like, oh, see ya, good talking to you. Versus, wow, I really appreciated this time with you. Like it's, like you've kind of, in some ways, you've made me forget that there's even a camera here and there's an outside world and all that, because there's such a level of care and interest I get from you and your presence, and it's just feels like a delicious level of brotherhood every time I see you.
Likewise.
Yeah.
And that's a huge goal as well, as to make it feel like it's just two, that the many don't even exist at times. The cameras aren't even there.
Yeah.
And then at the time when it's like, hey, the link's in the bio to check out Circling, it's like, oh yeah, there is somebody watching, or there are people watching, and they can check it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
speaking
yeah.
appreciation usually has a lot to do with completion.
Yeah.
Right?
That's good.
Just like, or
Yes.
it might not be appreciation. It might be, wow. So, like we just had a big argument, and it seems like we haven't solved it. Like we're not at the end of this. Like
That's good.
we're stuck right now. So like, okay, let's just be true about where we're at right now. Like we're stuck. So why don't we sleep on it for a day, a week, a month, and come back and like I'm committed to getting through this with you. Are you committed? You know, or maybe it's like, you know, we just don't work, and we don't have any really good reason to work. So let's just agree to disagree and say goodbye and have a beautiful life. You know, it's like whatever it is, like a completion that people can leave and actually feel complete and walk away with some level of meaning or some level of like hopeful anticipation for a future connection.
Yep. Yeah. Sovereignty, explorer, warrior, deep sea diver, midwife, integration, completion.
Yeah.
7 parts to the model of the Circling Institute. There's sessions happening in San Francisco, in Berkeley, across the United States now, even in Europe. You can find circling going on. So definitely look up the different locations through the Circling Institute and Circling Europe, and go and find these locations. Go spend a little bit of time trying to better understand, peel back the layers to our own soul, and also help be there while other people do it for themselves. Let's ask a couple questions on our way out that we typically ask. First question, what's the most beautiful thing in the world?
I'd say 2 things: love, and any expression of love, either towards yourself, towards another person, towards the world we live in. And I think what I might call just a different aspect of love, but a level of connection to source, level of connection to the other dimensions of reality that are not seen, but we can tune into and maybe have some level of faith that there's way more to us than we're paying attention to right now or turned on to. Yeah. And that level of possibility. Yeah.
I was one of my friends, Heidi, recently expanded my way of thinking to understanding like matter is only 4%, and the dark matter, the dark energy are 96%. And so just like the physical world is limited, and the energetic world is just so unknown.
Yeah, even the tiniest atom or the tiniest particle of physical existence is something like, you know, more than 99% empty space. So like, what's the empty space? Like, it's energy. You know, the quantum physicists are already recognizing and experimenting and finding that it's energy and it's held together by intelligence. So like, what's the intelligence?
As are planets and stars and solar systems, so much empty space.
Yeah.
How about, do you think we're alone in the cosmos?
How could that even be remotely possible, given what we just talked about? Like, I think there's like infinite levels of dimensions. Like, we're looking at the universe as being infinite and constantly expanding, and I think that's just like one of a billion planes of dimensionality and existence. So I don't even, you know, I'm a little wacky when it comes to that stuff. Like, I mean, I don't even believe we're alone in this room. I just think our eyes aren't tuned in to what our spirit, if we could connect back into like our divine birthright of our soul, and remembering like the gods that we actually are, and we could see on that dimension, we'd be seeing a whole level of other realities, and who knows, you know, existence and beings and God and whatever.
I'm ready to augment our perception to be able to tap into the energies that we don't actually feel or understand. A lot of people are very acute with their awareness in that sense, and because they've trained it for a long time. And I think you're doing a lot of that. Circling definitely does that. Do you think that there is a designer to the universe? Are we in a simulation?
So you're sort of asking me like my spiritual story. I think it's a mixture. I don't know if that's called duality. Like,
because sometimes when you look at stuff like this, it's like, whoa, look at how many Johns there are.
Here's my like playful belief about existence. Like, to me, like, if, you know, even the Bible says, you know, before there was anything, there was, like, quote, the word, right? Which I think of as just energy, like pure intelligence, right? And so if you give a little kid, if you put a little kid on a beach and they're playing with sand, by definition, everything they create is going to be made of sand, right? So if prior to existence, all you had was God, and then God decides to create the heaven and earth and mankind and animals and human beings and all that, by definition, everything had to be made of God. So I don't think God created heaven and earth and man and humankind. I think God became heaven and earth and man and humankind. So my playful fantasy is like infinite intelligence. After a while, it's got to get boring because you know everything. So like, let me split into 1 billion particles. Maybe there's still a core, maybe not, but you know, maybe it's a dimensionality thing. It's like across all existence. So there's still that infinite intelligence that knows itself, but there's also like 1 billion particles that have now been given free will. So like, go create, go get into trouble, go forget who you are, even go into like third dimensional reality where it's just physical form and we completely forget the other 98% of our existence, and see what we create and see how we discover ourselves again and recreate ourselves without the full knowledge of ourselves, right? And now, as different parts of God communicate with each other, like we discover new things that we didn't know before about each other and about ourselves. So that's my playful analogy of existence.
Love taking all that in. Yes, John. Thank you so much for this session. And we have so much more to unpack. I know there's so many more questions that we wanted to ask, and we'll have to make it happen soon. We'll have a couple circlings that we're going to do after this. So I'll circle John, John will circle me, so we'll go through this process and should be showing that to you guys. Links in the bio for Circling Institute, go check it out. Check out a session, go to one, go give it a go. Tell 2 people about what you learned today, have them go tell 2 people. Let's go start spreading the message around. If you guys had a good time, give us a comment in the bio, let us know what you thought. Subscribe, share the content, go and create with it, don't just consume, go make a write-up, write something about it, make a video about it, start a business about it, do cool things like that. And join us. We need to continue growing the studio, the project, paying the team members, making more impact. So join us on Patreon. We now accept cryptocurrency. The link is both in the bio as well as at Patreon. So much love, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to Ron Vargas, our producing partner, and our team. Thanks, John. Thank you very much. All right, bye, everyone.